At that yacht party, my daughter-in-law wasn't whispering out of kindness. She was whispering because she wanted the women in diamonds and the men in tailored suits to hear. "Your limping legs embarrass me," she said, forcing a smile that never reached her eyes. "You shouldn't be here." My son stood beside her, staring down at the polished deck as if the wood grain had suddenly become the most interesting thing in the world. I was ready to leave quietly. Then the billionaire host crossed the room, stopped in front of me, looked at my cane, then at my face, and said something no one there expected. At that yacht party, my daughter-in-law wasn't whispering out of kindness. She was whispering because she wanted the women in diamonds and the men in tailored suits to hear. "Your limping legs embarrass me," she said, forcing a smile that never reached her eyes. "You shouldn't be here." My son stood beside her, staring down at the polished deck as if the wood grain had suddenly become the most interesting thing in the world. I was ready to leave quietly. Then the billionaire host crossed the room, stopped in front of me, looked at my cane, then at my face, and said something no one there expected. But before that moment, before the music stopped and every champagne glass in the room seemed to freeze in midair, I was just an old man trying not to slow anyone down. My name is Arthur Miller, 71 years old, retired harbor captain, widower, father of one son, owner of one dark blue suit that had been pressed too many times and worn to too many funerals. The suit had belonged to better days. My wife, Helen, used to say it made me look dignified. Not handsome, not young, not rich. Dignified. That was her word. She had stood behind me in our bedroom mirror years ago, smoothing the shoulders with both hands, saying, "Arthur, a man doesn't need new clothes if he still carries himself properly." After she died, I kept the suit in the back of my closet in a garment bag. I only brought it out for weddings, memorial services, and the rare occasions my son remembered I was alive. That Saturday evening, my son Evan called me at 4:30. "Dad," he said, "you still coming tonight?" I was sitting at my kitchen table, cleaning the silver head of my old black cane with a soft cloth. Through the window, the late afternoon sun was falling across the little backyard Helen had planted with hydrangeas 30 years before. "You invited me," I said. There was a pause, not long enough to be rude, but long enough for a father to hear what a son did not say. "Right," Evan said. "Of course. Vanessa just wanted me to remind you, it's kind of formal." I looked down at my suit laid across the chair beside me. "I have a jacket. I know, Dad. I just mean this is a pretty big crowd. Business people, investors, some of Vanessa's connections. The yacht belongs to Charles Whitmore." He said the name carefully, like he expected it to impress me. It did. Not for the reason he thought. I had not heard that name spoken aloud in years. Charles Whitmore. To most people, he was a billionaire developer, a man whose name appeared on hospitals, museums, scholarships, marina projects, and glass buildings that caught the sunset in downtown skylines. To me, he was something else. A memory from a black ocean. A young man coughing salt water. A broken radio. A storm no sane captain would forget. But Evan did not know that story. Almost nobody did. "That's nice," I said. "Just, take your time getting there, and maybe wear comfortable shoes. There are steps." I smiled a little, though he could not see it. "Son, every place has steps when you get old." He gave a small laugh, but it faded quickly. "Vanessa wants everything to go smoothly tonight. This could be important for us." Us. That word used to include me. "I won't cause trouble," I said. "Dad, nobody said that." No, nobody had to. By 6:30, I was standing at the marina, one hand around my cane, the other holding a small paper gift bag with a bottle of Kentucky bourbon inside. I had bought it for Evan because I did not know what else fathers were supposed to bring to yacht parties, with the glasses probably cost more than my first car. The yacht sat under the evening sky like a floating mansion. 3 levels of white curves, polished chrome blue underwater lights glowing beneath the hull, and windows bright enough to make the harbor water shimmer gold. The name on the stern read Providence. I stood there for a moment longer than I should have. Providence. That word has a way of finding old men. A young crew member in a Navy blazer offered me his hand at the gangway. I thanked him, but I still felt the familiar pull of embarrassment in my chest as I lifted my left leg carefully, then brought the right one after it. My bad leg always followed late, like an apology. 1 step. Pause. Another step. Pause. Behind me, I heard a woman laugh softly. Not cruelly, maybe not even at me. But when age has already made you feel visible in the wrong ways, every laugh becomes a mirror. At the top of the gangway, Evan appeared in a charcoal suit that fit him perfectly. My boy had grown into a handsome man. Tall like his mother's side, sharp jaw, expensive haircut, the kind of confidence that looked natural because he had learned to borrow it from rooms like this. "Dad," he said, leaning in for a quick hug that touched shoulders but not hearts. "You made it." I did. His eyes dropped to my cane, then to my shoes. "Everything okay?" "Same leg I had yesterday." He smiled, but he was already looking past me. Vanessa came over a second later. My daughter-in-law was beautiful in the way expensive things are beautiful, polished, careful, and designed to be admired. Her silver dress caught the light with every movement. Her hair was pinned up perfectly. A diamond necklace rested at her throat like it had always lived there. "Arthur," she said, "not Dad, never Dad." "Vanessa," I said, "you look lovely." Her smile appeared and disappeared so quickly it barely qualified as kindness. "Thank you. We're trying to keep the flow of the evening smooth, so just be careful moving around. There are a lot of important people here. I'll do my best not to sink the boat." Evan chuckled under his breath. Vanessa did not. She glanced toward the upper deck where guests were standing under strings of warm lights, drinking champagne, touching elbows, laughing in that controlled way wealthy people laugh when they are still measuring one another. "Evan, we need to say hello to the Hargroves," she said. Then she looked at me. "Arthur, maybe you can sit near the side for now, somewhere less crowded." Less crowded meant less visible. I understood. A lifetime near the water teaches a man to read currents. Some are on the surface, easy to spot. Others move underneath, quiet and dangerous. I followed them toward the dinner area, my cane tapping gently against the deck. The yacht smelled of salt air, grilled lobster, expensive perfume, and teak wood warmed by the day's sun. A jazz trio played near the bar. Waiters moved with trays of oysters and crystal flutes. The city skyline glowed behind us, orange, fading into blue. For a few minutes I let myself enjoy it. Helen would have loved the lights on the water. She would have squeezed my hand and whispered that we had no business being around so many people with watches that cost more than our house. Then she would have charmed half of them before dessert. I was thinking of that when Vanessa's voice cut through the music. Not loud, worse, soft enough to pretend it was private, sharp enough to make sure it was not. She had stopped near a couple in evening clothes, people she clearly wanted to impress. Evan stood beside her. I had fallen half a step behind, as usual. Vanessa turned her head slightly, still smiling for the couple. "Arthur," she said through that smile, "could you please not stand right here?" I looked at her, confused for one honest second. "I'm sorry." Her eyes flicked down to my cane, then to my leg. "Your limping legs embarrass me," she whispered. "You shouldn't be here." The words did not hit all at once. That is the strange thing about humiliation. It arrives slowly, like cold water rising around your ankles before you realize the room is flooding. I heard the jazz, I smelled the lobster, I saw Evan's hand tighten around his glass, and I waited. Not for Vanessa to apologize, for my son to remember he was my son. Evan looked at me, then at his wife, then down at the deck. The couple nearby pretended not to hear, which somehow made it worse. A waiter stepped around us. Someone laughed near the bar. The yacht rocked gently beneath my feet, and for a moment I felt every year in my bones. I could have said many things. I could have told Vanessa that these legs had carried groceries into the house when Evan was a baby and Helen was too tired to stand, that they had climbed frozen marina ladders at 3 in the morning, that they had braced against storm decks and hospital floors and cemetery grass. I could have told her that the limp she hated was not weakness, it was history. Instead, I looked past her toward the dark water beyond the rail. The harbor lights trembled there, broken into gold lines by the tide. And I said nothing. For a moment after Vanessa said it, no one moved. Not really. The yacht kept breathing beneath us, rising and falling on the black water. The jazz trio kept playing some soft version of an old song I almost recognized. Glasses still chimed somewhere behind me. A woman near the railing laughed too brightly at a joke that probably did not deserve it. But in that small circle between Vanessa's silver dress and my son's polished shoes, time stopped. I looked at Evan. That was all I did. I did not raise my voice. I did not ask Vanessa to repeat herself. I did not embarrass her in return, though I could have. I simply looked at the boy I had raised, the boy whose fever I had checked with the back of my hand, the boy I had carried from the car into the house when he fell asleep after Little League games. And I waited for one sentence, just one. Dad belongs here. Or maybe, Vanessa, don't speak to him like that. Even a quiet, hey, that's my father, would have been enough. Evan opened his mouth. His eyes flicked toward the couple standing nearby, then toward a group of men by the bar who looked like investors or judges or people who were used to having their names printed on invitations. Finally, he looked at Vanessa. She kept smiling. That was when I understood she had not spoken out of anger. Anger is messy. Anger slips. What Vanessa had done was cleaner than that. She had placed me exactly where she thought I belonged, below the deck, below the party, below the image she was trying to build. Evan took a breath. Dad, he said, maybe you should rest inside for a bit. There it was. Not defense, management. He said it gently, which somehow made it harder to bear. A harsh word can be fought. A gentle dismissal asks you to cooperate in your own humiliation. Vanessa's shoulders relaxed, barely. The couple beside her found sudden interest in the skyline. Evan reached for my elbow, not lovingly, but the way a person guides an awkward object out of a narrow hallway. I'm fine, I said. I know, he whispered. It's just crowded out here. Crowded. That word did a lot of work. Crowded meant visible. Crowded meant inconvenient. Crowded meant my cane might tap against the floor. At the wrong moment, my leg might drag when I crossed the deck. My old suit might make people wonder why I had been invited. I looked at his hand near my elbow. For a second, I saw another hand, smaller, sticky with grape jelly. Evan, at 6 years old, reaching up to grab my fingers as we crossed a parking lot in the rain. He had trusted me completely then. He used to limp beside me for fun after my injury got worse, exaggerating each step, laughing until Helen told him not to make fun of his father. I never minded. Children imitate what they love before they understand what pain costs. Now my grown son stood beside me in a $1,000 suit, asking me to disappear politely. Arthur, Vanessa said, still smiling, the interior lounge is very comfortable. You'll be much better there. Better? I looked at her. Better for who? Her smile tightened. Evan lowered his voice. Dad, please, not tonight. Not tonight. As if there were some better evening to have dignity. But I heard the plea under the words. He was nervous. He was scared of losing standing in a room that had not yet given him any. Maybe Vanessa had told him this party mattered. Maybe there was a deal, a promotion, a partnership, some ladder he thought he could climb if only his old father did not remind people where he came from. I could have refused. I could have stood there and let the silence become a courtroom. But fathers do a foolish thing even when they are old. They protect their children from consequences they have earned. So I nodded once. All right, I said. Evan exhaled like I had just saved him from something terrible. The strange thing was, I had. He guided me toward the side passage. His hand hovered near my back, not quite touching. We passed a long table set with white flowers and gold-rimmed plates. Each place card was handwritten in dark ink. I noticed names I knew from newspapers and charity galas. Near the center of the table, one card sat slightly raised in a silver holder, waiting for someone important. I did not look long enough to read it. Vanessa stayed behind, already laughing again with the couple. Her voice rose lightly bright as broken glass. Inside the yacht was quieter. The lounge had cream leather sofas, polished wood walls, and framed photographs of harbors from around the world. Everything smelled faintly of lemon oil and money. Through the windows I could see the party outside like a scene in a silent film. Evan stopped near a sofa. "You can sit here," he said. "I'll check on you in a few minutes." I lowered myself carefully. My hip gave its usual dull complaint. The cane rested against my knee. Evan stood there, shifting his weight. He looked younger suddenly, not in a good way. Younger like a boy who had broken something and was deciding whether to confess. "Dad," he said, "Vanessa didn't mean it the way it sounded." I almost smiled. "She said my limping legs embarrass her." His jaw tightened. "She's under a lot of pressure. From my legs?" He looked away. There was my answer. I leaned back against the sofa and studied him. He had Helen's eyes. That was the cruel part. My wife's eyes had been warm enough to forgive nearly anything. On Evan, they had learned to look past what hurt. "When did this happen?" I asked quietly. His brow furrowed. "When did what happen?" "When did you start seeing me the way she does?" That landed harder than I meant it to. Evan's face changed. For 1 second he looked wounded. Then he covered it with irritation the way grown children do when truth gets too close. "Dad, that's not fair." "No," I said. "It probably isn't." He rubbed the back of his neck. "This night matters. Charles Whitmore is here. People like him can change our lives." I looked out through the window at the dark harbor. "Be careful," I said. "About what?" "Letting people change your life before you know what they value." He did not answer. Maybe he did not understand. Maybe he understood too well. A crew member stepped into the lounge carrying a tray of drinks. He gave me a polite nod, then turned to Evan. "Mr. Whitmore has just boarded, sir. They're gathering everyone on the main deck." Evan straightened immediately. The worry vanished from his face, replaced by ambition. "I have to go," he said. "Of course." He hesitated at the door. For a moment I thought he might say something human, something a son would say. Instead, he adjusted his cuff. "Just stay here until I come get you, okay?" Then he walked out. I sat alone in that beautiful room, listening to the applause rise outside as the billionaire host arrived. And I realized that Vanessa's cruelty had not broken my heart. My son's silence had. The applause outside began politely. Then it grew. That is how you can tell when a powerful man enters a room. People do not simply greet him. They adjust themselves around him. Voices lift half a note. Backs straighten. Conversations pause, then restart with better posture. Laughter becomes cleaner, brighter, more useful. Through the lounge window, I watched the guests turn toward the stern of the yacht. A man in a dark navy tuxedo had stepped aboard. Charles Whitmore was older than the photographs I had seen on magazine covers, but not smaller. Some men shrink with age. He seemed to have sharpened. White hair neatly combed, shoulders square, one hand resting lightly on the rail as he accepted greetings. There was a stillness about him that made everybody else look slightly too eager. I had known him once as a terrified young man with salt water in his lungs. The world knew him as a billionaire. I sat back in the cream leather sofa and let the curtain fall halfway across the window. No one had told me Charles Whitmore would be here in person. Evan had spoken his name like a symbol, a door to better circles. Vanessa had treated the night like an audition. But seeing him there, alive, and surrounded by people who needed him, pulled a thread loose in my chest. 32 years is long enough for a man to become a different person. It is not always long enough for an old captain to forget a storm. I looked down at my cane. The silver handle was worn smooth where my palm rested. Helen had bought it for me after the doctors said the damage was permanent. I hated it at first. I was only 39 then, too young to accept any object that made me look dependent. Helen had placed it against the kitchen table and said, "Arthur Pride won't help you cross a room. This will." She was right, as usual. Outside, Charles Whitmore moved through the crowd with controlled warmth. He shook hands. He touched shoulders. He remembered names. Men leaned in when he spoke. Women smiled, as though each word belonged only to them. Vanessa appeared near him like a flame drawn to oxygen. She had left me in the lounge less than 5 minutes earlier, but there she was now, gliding across the deck with Evan beside her. Her hand rested on my son's arm, not affectionately but strategically, guiding him into the right angle of attention. I could see her face through the glass. Open smile, bright eyes, perfect posture. Nothing in her expression suggested she had just told an old man his damaged legs were an embarrassment. That is another thing age teaches you. Some people do not change masks. They simply turn toward better lighting. Mr. Whitmore. Vanessa said, her voice carrying faintly through the open lounge door. "It's such an honor to finally meet you. I'm Vanessa Miller. My husband Evan and I have admired your foundation's work for years." Evan shook Charles's hand. From where I sat, I could see how hard he was trying to look relaxed. "Evan Miller," my son said. "Thank you for having us, sir." Charles smiled politely. "Glad you could come." He said it kindly enough, but there was no spark of recognition. Why would there be? Evan was one more ambitious man in a suit, one more guest hoping proximity might turn into opportunity. Vanessa did not notice, or maybe she refused to. She leaned in slightly. "Evan's been working on a marina redevelopment proposal, sustainable access, community-facing, really aligned with the kind of legacy projects you support." There it was, the reason. Not dinner, not family, not celebration. An opening. I looked away for a moment, not because I was angry, but because I was tired. There is a special kind of ache in realizing your presence at a family event was never about love. You were brought along like an old photograph, useful only if it made the story look warmer. A crew member entered the lounge quietly. "Can I get you anything, sir?" he asked. "No, thank you." He glanced toward the deck. "They'll be starting dinner soon. Would you like assistance to your table?" My table. I almost said I had been told to stay here, but old habits held me in place. I did not want to shame Evan, even alone with a stranger. "I'm all right for now," I said. The young man gave a respectful nod and left. A few seconds later, I heard the soft chime of a glass being tapped. The music faded. Charles Whitmore stood near the center of the main deck, beneath warm string lights that swayed gently with the yacht's motion. Behind him, the harbor stretched black and silver. Beyond that, the city rose in towers of gold, "Friends," he said, and the deck quieted. His voice was lower than I expected, not theatrical, not the voice of a man who needed to prove he belonged at the center of attention. He already knew he did. "Thank you for being here tonight aboard Providence." A small wave of appreciative laughter moved through the crowd, the kind people offer when a host says the name of his own yacht. Charles smiled, but his eyes did not laugh with them. This vessel has hosted fundraisers, board meetings, anniversary dinners, and more than a few conversations I probably should have had on land. More laughter. Vanessa laughed too loudly. Evan smiled beside her, nervous and hopeful. "But tonight," Charles continued, "is different." Something in his tone changed the air. The guests felt it. Even from inside the lounge, I felt it. Conversations vanished completely. Glasses lowered. Waiters paused along the edges of the deck. Charles looked down at the paper in his hand, then folded it without reading. "I spent most of my life letting people call me self-made," he said. "It's a flattering phrase. It looks good in profiles. It makes success sound clean and solitary. But it is almost never true." A few people nodded thoughtfully, as if they had always believed that. Charles looked out over them. "No man survives this life alone. No man builds anything lasting alone. And sometimes the reason a man gets to grow old at all is because somebody else was willing to pay a price he never asked them to pay." My fingers tightened around the head of my cane. The room around me seemed to narrow. Outside, Vanessa's smile had become politely confused. Evan stood very still. Charles continued, 32 years ago, before any of this existed, before the foundation, before the towers, before the name Whitmore meant anything useful, I was a young fool who thought money made me braver than weather." A murmur moved across the crowd. I closed my eyes. Not now, I thought, not here. But Charles's voice carried on steady and certain. "There was a storm off the Carolina coast. I had no business being on the water that night. My radio failed. My boat turned over. And the man who came after me should not have had to risk his life for mine." The harbor wind slipped through the open door and touched my face. For the first time all evening, my bad leg ached not from age, but from memory. Charles turned slightly, scanning the crowd. "I was told he would be here tonight," he said. "I asked for him to be seated near me because there are some debts a man should acknowledge while he still has breath in his body." Vanessa looked quickly at the place cards near the center table. Evan looked toward the lounge. And then Charles Whitmore turned his head. His eyes found the window, found the sofa, found my cane, then found my face. The billionaire host stopped speaking. Every person on that yacht turned to see what had silenced him. For a few seconds, Charles Whitmore only stared. The silence that followed was not the polite silence people give a speaker. It was heavier than that. It had confusion in it, curiosity, discomfort. The kind of silence that makes every person in a room suddenly aware of where their hands are, how they are standing, and whether they are supposed to know what is happening. I sat inside the lounge with one hand resting on my cane. Through the window I could see Charles looking directly at me, not past me, not through me, at me. 32 years had changed both of us. It had turned his dark hair white and carved deeper lines beside his eyes. It had bent my back a little and left my right leg with a drag that announced me before I entered a room. But recognition is a strange thing. It does not always need youth. Sometimes it lives in the shape of a jaw, in the set of shoulders, in the eyes of a man who was there when death came close enough to breathe on both of you. Charles took one step away from the microphone. No one moved. Then he took another. A woman near the front whispered, "Is something wrong?" Vanessa's smile froze. Evan turned toward the lounge, his face losing color so gradually that I almost felt sorry for him. Charles crossed the deck slowly, not because he was weak, but because whatever he had seen in me had pulled him out of the evening he had planned and into another night entirely. The crowd parted for him. That was power too. No one asked him where he was going. No one blocked his way. Men who had probably interrupted senators and CEOs simply stepped aside as Charles Whitmore walked away from his own speech and headed toward an old man sitting alone in the interior lounge. I wanted to stand before he reached me. That was the first foolish instinct, old manners. When a host approaches, you rise. When a man of importance enters your space, you meet him properly. My father had taught me that before I knew how to shave, so I planted my cane against the floor and leaned forward. My leg protested immediately. The pain shot up from my knee into my hip, bright and familiar. I gripped the cane harder, trying to make my body obey before Charles reached the doorway. "Dad," Evan said from somewhere behind him, low and tense. I did not look at my son. Charles stepped into the lounge. The music outside had stopped completely now. The yacht engines hummed softly beneath us. Waves brushed against the hull. Somewhere, ice shifted inside a glass with a tiny, nervous sound. Charles stood just inside the doorway. For one moment, he did not look like a billionaire. He did not look like a man whose name appeared on buildings or whose handshake could open bank vaults. He looked like someone seeing a ghost he had been hoping to meet. "Don't get up," he said. His voice was quiet, but everyone heard it. I stayed half-lifted from the sofa, embarrassed by the awkward angle of my body, then lowered myself back down. Charles took off his glasses. His eyes moved from my cane to my face, then back to the cane again. Not with disgust, not with pity, with sorrow. That was harder to take. He swallowed once. Captain Miller. The name moved across the deck like a match dropped into dry grass. Captain Miller. Not Arthur, not Mr. Miller. Not the inconvenient old father sitting inside because his limp did not match the table settings. Captain Miller. I heard Vanessa inhale. I heard Evan say almost under his breath, "What?" Charles took another step closer. "My God," he said, "it is you." I looked at him for a long moment. A dozen answers came to me. "Yes, Charles, still breathing, older than either of us planned. You finally learned to check the weather before leaving harbor." Instead, I nodded once. "Mr. Whitmore." His face tightened at that. "No," he said immediately. "No, don't do that." A murmur passed through the guests gathered outside the lounge entrance. People craned their necks to see me. The same people who had spent the evening looking through me now leaned in as if I had become part of the program. Charles turned partly toward them, but his eyes stayed on me. "This is Captain Arthur Miller," he said. The title struck me in the chest. I had not heard it spoken that way in years. At the marina, younger men called me Art. At the grocery store, I was Sir. At the doctor's office, I was Mr. Miller. In my own son's house, I was sometimes an obligation folded into a holiday schedule. But Captain Arthur Miller belonged to another life, a life of salt-stiff jackets, dawn inspections, storm warnings, rescue calls, and men trusting your voice in the dark because panic killed faster than water. Vanessa stepped closer to Evan. Her face had changed now. The polished charm was still there, but it no longer fit properly. Her eyes kept flicking between Charles and me, trying to calculate the distance between the man she had insulted and the man the host had just honored with a title. Charles looked back at me. "I asked them to make sure you had a seat at my table," he said, "right beside me." My hand tightened over the cane. Outside, several heads turned toward the long dinner table, the raised silver holder at the center. The place card I had not read. Evan looked at it too. Vanessa did not move. A crew member, pale and anxious now, stepped forward with the card in his hand. He glanced at Charles, then at me. "I'm sorry, sir," he said. "There must have been some confusion." Charles did not take his eyes off me. "What confusion?" The crew member looked as if he wished the floor would open beneath him. Captain Miller was escorted to the lounge before dinner. Escorted. That word hung there. I did not turn toward Evan. I did not look at Vanessa. I did not need to. Charles did. His eyes moved slowly from me to my son, then to my daughter-in-law. Evan's face had gone stiff with shame. Vanessa tried to speak first. "Mr. Whitmore, I'm sure it was just—" Charles raised one hand, not sharply, not angrily, but with such quiet authority that her mouth closed. Then he turned back to me and stepped closer. The crowd watched him as if the yacht itself had tilted. "Captain," he said, and his voice broke slightly on the word. "I have spent 32 years waiting for the chance to thank you properly." I looked at the people gathered there, the diamonds, the tailored suits, the curious faces, my son among them. Then I looked at Charles Whitmore, the young man from the storm, hidden inside the old billionaire. "You already thanked me," I said quietly. "You lived." No one said a word after that. Charles Whitmore stood in front of me, as if the rest of the yacht had disappeared. For a moment, I thought he might reach for my hand. Instead, he placed one palm over his heart and bowed his head just slightly. It was not dramatic. It was not for the crowd. That made it more powerful. When he turned back toward the guests, his face had changed. The polished host was gone. In his place stood a man carrying an old debt. "Most of you know pieces of my story," Charles said. "You know the companies, the foundation, the hospitals, the scholarships, the buildings with my name on them. People like to tell those parts because they make success sound clean." He looked back at me. "But the truth is, none of those stories happen if Captain Arthur Miller had made one different choice on one terrible night." The deck stayed silent, even the night. The deck stayed silent. Even the harbor seemed to quiet around us. Charles walked slowly back toward the center of the main deck, but he did not ask me to follow. Maybe he understood that standing too long cost me. Maybe after 32 years, he still remembered what the storm had taken from my body. Evan stood near the dinner table, one hand at his side, the other still holding a glass he had forgotten to drink from. Vanessa was beside him. Her face was pale now, but not soft. Not yet. She was not sorry. She was frightened. There is a difference. Charles faced the guests. "I was 29 years old," he said, "too rich for my own wisdom, and too proud to listen to men who understood the sea better than I did. I had bought my first serious boat that year. I thought that made me a sailor." A few older men lowered their eyes. Every man past 40 has known some version of being young and foolish. There was a storm building off the Carolina coast. I was warned not to go out. I went anyway. The words pulled me backward, not gently. One second I was in a warm yacht lounge, smelling polished wood and expensive perfume. The next, I could taste rain driven sideways by wind. I could hear the Coast Guard radio cutting in and out. I could feel the deck under my boots pitching so hard that every step needed permission from God. I had been 39 then, stronger in the shoulders, faster on ladders, still young enough to believe pain was something that happened after the work was done. That night the call came just after midnight. Small vessel overturned, one man missing, last known position drifting southeast, weather worsening. I remembered looking at my crew, 3 men, all tired, all scared, all waiting to see what I would decide. A captain's fear is allowed, his hesitation is not. So we went. Charles continued. My boat capsized before help reached me. I remember the water more than anything. Cold, black, loud. People think drowning is quiet. It isn't. not in a storm. The ocean screams while it takes you. A woman near the bar covered her mouth. I stared through the window at the dark harbor beyond the yacht, and I was no longer seeing city lights. I was seeing waves rising like walls. Charles's voice grew lower. I had a life jacket on, but the straps were tangled. I had hit my head. I could not tell which way was shore, which way was sky. I remember a light, then a man's voice cutting through the wind. He looked at me again. Captain Miller's voice. I closed my eyes. I remembered shouting until my throat felt torn open. "Hold on! Look at me! Don't fight the water!" Men in panic do not obey words. They obey tone. If your voice shakes, they hear death in it. So you put steel in your voice even when your hands are numb. "We found him half-conscious," I said quietly. I had not meant to speak, but every face turned toward me. Charles did not interrupt. I drew in a slow breath. His boat was gone. The water was full of debris. We got a line on him once, then lost it. Second time, he slipped under. Charles nodded, eyes wet now. "What Captain Miller isn't saying," he told the crowd, "is that he went in after me." A murmur broke across the deck. I felt Vanessa look at my leg. This time, I let her. I could still remember the instant I hit the water. The cold struck so hard it felt like impact. My chest locked. My hands went numb almost immediately. But I saw Charles under a sheet of white foam, one arm tangled in a torn section of rigging, his face turned upward, eyes open but empty. I went down. The rope around my waist jerked once, twice. Then something heavy slammed into us. A broken piece of mast or railing, I never knew which, came rolling through the wave and crushed my right leg against the wreckage. The pain was so bright I saw white instead of black. For 1 second, I let go of Charles. Then I thought of Helen. Not because I was brave, because I was afraid of leaving her a widow before breakfast. And somehow fear made room for duty. I grabbed Charles again. "My crew pulled us both out," I said. "That's all." Charles shook his head. "That is not all." He stepped closer to the doorway so he could see me when he spoke. "They told me later your leg was trapped for nearly 4 minutes. You refused to let them cut the line between us because you thought I would be lost. You kept one arm locked around me until they dragged us to the rescue boat." The deck was completely still now. No whispering, no polite coughs, no champagne glasses, just the water tapping against the hull, and an old story finally being told. Charles's voice softened. "I spent 3 days in the hospital. Captain Miller spent 7 weeks there. His right leg was broken in multiple places, nerve damage, surgeries, complications. He could have retired with a public commendation and made sure everybody knew what he did. He looked at me with something close to wonder, but he didn't. He went home. He healed as much as his body allowed, and he went back to work." I stared down at my cane. I had a family to feed, I said. A few people smiled sadly because they understood that kind of answer. It was the answer men of my generation gave when they did not want applause for doing what needed doing. Charles turned toward the crowd again. "So when you see Captain Miller's limp," he said, "do not see weakness, do not see age, do not see inconvenience." His eyes moved briefly and unmistakably to Vanessa. "See the reason I am standing here tonight." Vanessa looked down. For the first time all evening, she had no smile ready. For a long moment after Charles said those words, nobody on Providence seemed willing to breathe first. "See the reason I am standing here tonight." I had heard men say kind things before, at retirement dinners, at memorials, at fundraisers where old photographs made younger people feel connected to something steadier than themselves. Kindness in public can sometimes feel like another kind of burden. But Charles Whitmore was not flattering me. He was correcting the room. I could feel it happening around me. The way the guests no longer looked at my cane as an inconvenience, the way their eyes moved from my leg to my face, the way the silence changed from curiosity into respect, not pity, not embarrassment, respect. Mockery at least gives you a place to hide. Respect asks you to be seen. Charles turned toward one of his assistants, a woman in a black dress holding a slim folder against her chest. "Marianne," he said softly. She stepped forward at once. The crew member who had carried my place card earlier still stood near the dining table, looking miserable enough to jump overboard. Marianne took the card from him, glanced at it, then walked into the lounge. She did not hand it to Charles. She handed it to me. The card was thick cream paper with my name written in dark blue ink. Captain Arthur Miller. Not Mr. Arthur Miller, not Evan Miller's father. Captain. Beneath my name, in smaller letters, was written, Guest of Honor. I stared at those words until they blurred. A man can spend a lifetime telling himself he does not need recognition. Most days that is true. You go to work, you raise your child, you bury your wife, you fix what breaks, you keep moving because stopping would make the grief louder. But then once in a while the world turns around and says, I remember. And you realize some quiet part of you had been waiting to hear it. I looked up at Charles. You didn't have to do this, I said. His expression tightened. Yes, I did. Then he faced the guests again. Tonight, he said, was never meant to be another donor dinner. It was never meant to be about networking proposals or photographs by the water. The last words landed close to Vanessa. She flinched as if touched by cold rain. Charles continued, I invited you here because I am announcing the creation of the Captain Arthur Miller Maritime Rescue Foundation. A low sound moved through the crowd. Surprise. Approval. People realizing they were present for something larger than business. Behind Charles, a screen lowered silently from the upper deck. The yacht lights dimmed. On the screen appeared an image I had not seen in decades. My old rescue boat. White hull, blue stripe, rain-stained deck. My younger self stood near the rail in a Coast Guard jacket, one hand shading my eyes from the sun. I looked tired, stubborn, and unaware that anyone had taken the photograph. Helen had loved that picture. I had lost my copy when a pipe burst in the hallway closet 10 years earlier. Seeing it there, 30 feet wide on a billionaire's yacht, nearly broke me. Charles looked back at the screen, then at me. The foundation will fund emergency training for volunteer rescue crews, scholarships for children of fallen maritime responders, and equipment grants for small coastal stations that do not have the money they need when storms come. He paused. And next spring, we will break ground on the Miller Coastal Rescue Center in Beaufort Harbor. The guests applauded. This time, the applause did not feel polished. It came slowly at first, then with weight. People turned toward me as they clapped. Some smiled. Some had tears in their eyes. One older man near the bar placed 2 fingers to his brow in a small salute. I did not know what to do with my hands. My cane was in one, the place card in the other. Charles walked back into the lounge and lowered himself slightly so he was not towering over me. Captain, he said, would you allow me the honor of walking you to your seat? I almost said no. Pride is a stubborn old animal. It growls even when kindness comes through the door. But then I looked past Charles and saw Evan. My son's face was undone, not ruined, not exposed in some satisfying way, undone. Like the seams of the life he had stitched around ambition were loosening one by one. He was looking at the screen at the photograph of me young and strong, then at the old man in front of him. I wondered if he was seeing 2 different fathers, or if he was finally understanding they were the same one. Vanessa stood beside him with both hands clasped tightly in front of her. The diamonds at her throat still glittered, but they no longer gave her power. They only looked cold. I turned back to Charles. "All right," I said. He offered me his arm, not his hand, his arm. There is dignity in that difference. He was not dragging me. He was not assisting an invalid. He was walking beside a man. I took it. The first step out of the lounge was difficult, not because of my leg. I had made peace with that pain long ago. It was difficult because every person on that yacht was watching. But the deck felt different beneath me now. My cane tapped once. No one laughed. It tapped again. No one looked away. Charles matched my pace without making a show of it. Slow, steady, respectful. When we reached the center table, he pulled out the chair beside his own. "This is where you belonged from the beginning," he said. I sat down carefully. The place card stood before me. Captain Arthur Miller, guest of honor. Charles raised his glass. "To the man who gave me my life back, before I had learned what to do with it," he said. "This man is the reason I'm alive. Tonight was never about me. It was about him." Every glass lifted. Across the table, Evan could not meet my eyes. Dinner began, but for a while no one seemed hungry. Plates of roasted sea bass, buttered asparagus, and tiny golden potatoes arrived in front of people who had suddenly forgotten how to hold forks naturally. The waiters moved carefully, as if they were walking through the remains of a storm. Soft music returned near the bar, but even the saxophone sounded cautious now. I sat beside Charles Whitmore at the center of the table. That fact alone had rearranged the whole evening. Earlier, I had been an old man in the way, a slow step, a cane, a wrinkle in Vanessa's perfect picture. Now people leaned toward me with careful respect, asking questions about the harbor, the rescue station, my years on the water. They did not interrupt. They did not glance past me to find someone more useful. It should have felt satisfying. Instead, it felt heavy, because across the table, my son looked like a man sitting beside the wreckage of something he had helped build. Evan barely touched his food. His eyes kept moving from Charles to me, then down to his plate. Vanessa sat beside him, pale beneath her makeup. Her silver dress still caught the light, but the shine no longer seemed elegant. It looked desperate. Charles did not humiliate her. That would have been easy. He could have told the whole table what she had said. He could have asked why the guest of honor had been hidden in the lounge. He could have crushed her with one sentence, and every person on that yacht would have followed his lead. But he didn't. Power reveals character most clearly when a person chooses not to use all of it. So we ate, or pretended to. Halfway through dinner, a woman named Mrs. Hargrove, elegant and silver-haired, turned toward me. "Captain Miller," she said, "did your family know about all this?" The question landed softly, but it landed. Evan looked up. Vanessa stopped moving. I wiped my mouth with the napkin and took a slow breath. "My wife knew," I said. Charles lowered his eyes respectfully. "Helen was proud of him," he said. "I wrote to her after the rescue. She sent me one letter back. That surprised me." I turned to him. "She never told me that." A small smile touched his face. "She told me not to make a spectacle of you. She said you were allergic to praise." For the first time that night I laughed. A real laugh. Quiet, but mine. "That sounds like Helen." Charles reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and took out a folded envelope protected in clear plastic. Time had yellowed the paper. The handwriting on the front stopped the breath in my chest. Helen's handwriting. "Arthur never saved you for thanks," she had written. "He saved you because that is who he is. If you want to honor him someday, honor the work. Help the men who go out when everyone else comes in." I did not read the whole letter there. I couldn't. My vision blurred after the first line. Evan saw it. I knew he did. Something in his face cracked open when he recognized his mother's handwriting. For years he had spoken of Helen like she belonged to a softer past, something framed on the mantel and visited on anniversaries. But there she was, present at that table in ink and memory, standing beside the truth of my life. Vanessa pushed back her chair. It made a sharp sound against the deck. Every conversation stopped. She stood too quickly, one hand gripping the edge of the table. Her lips parted, but no words came. The woman who had known exactly how to smile, exactly when to laugh, exactly how to position herself near important people, suddenly looked very young. "Arthur," she said. My name sounded different in her mouth now, not smaller, unsteady. Evan reached for her wrist. "Vanessa," she pulled away. "No," she whispered. Then, louder, though her voice trembled, "No, I need to say something." The guests looked at her. These were the people she had wanted to impress. The diamonds, the tailored suits, the connections, the people who had heard enough, seen enough, and understood more than she wished they did. Vanessa turned toward me. "I was cruel to you," she said. The yacht was so quiet I could hear water brushing the hull. "I said something terrible before dinner. I said your limp embarrassed me." Her voice broke slightly. "I said you shouldn't be here." Evan closed his eyes. There it was, the truth spoken aloud, not by an enemy, but by the person who had tried to bury it. A few guests looked down. Mrs. Hargrove's mouth tightened. Charles did not move. He watched Vanessa with the calm expression of a man letting consequences arrive without assistance. Vanessa's eyes filled, though whether from shame or fear, I still could not tell. "I didn't know," she said. "I didn't know what happened to you. I didn't know what your injury meant." I looked at her for a long moment. Then I placed Helen's letter gently on the table and rested both hands on my cane. "That's true," I said. "You didn't know." Relief flickered across her face too soon. I was not finished. "But you didn't need to know." Her face changed. I spoke quietly because anger would have made the lesson smaller. "You didn't need to know I had saved anyone. You didn't need to know Charles. You didn't need to know about the storm or the surgeries or the years it took to walk without falling. You only needed to know that I was an old man invited by my family." Vanessa lowered her head, and that should have been enough. No one spoke. I felt Evan looking at me, but I kept my eyes on Vanessa. "You weren't embarrassed by my limp," I said. "You were embarrassed by not knowing what it meant." Her shoulders began to shake. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I nodded once. "I believe you're sorry tonight." That hurt her more than forgiveness would have, because forgiveness given too quickly can let people escape the room unchanged. I did not hate Vanessa. That was the truth. Hatred takes energy, and age teaches you to spend what little strength you have on better things. But I had learned something about apologies. Some are bridges. Some are umbrellas held up only until the rain stops. "You have a chance," I said, "not to fix tonight. Tonight already happened. But to become the kind of woman who doesn't need a billionaire to explain why an old man deserves respect." Vanessa covered her mouth with one hand. Then she sat down slowly. This time she did not look at the diamonds, the suits, or Charles Whitmore. She looked at my cane, and finally she looked ashamed of the right thing. After Vanessa sat down, the yacht did not return to the way it had been. Some moments do not pass. They settle. The rest of dinner moved quietly, almost carefully, as if everyone at the table understood they had witnessed something private that happened to unfold in public. Knives touched plates. Glasses were refilled. The city lights shimmered beyond the rail. The jazz trio played again, softer than before, a slow melody that seemed to belong to another decade. Charles kept Helen's letter beside my plate until I was ready to take it. I folded it with both hands and placed it in the inside pocket of my old blue suit, close to my heart. For years I had believed I had lost the last unexpected pieces of my wife, but that night aboard a yacht, where I had been told I did not belong, Helen found a way to sit beside me. When dessert arrived, Charles leaned toward me. "Arthur," he said quietly, "I hope tonight did not bring you more pain than peace." I looked toward the harbor. Peace is not the absence of pain. Any old man can tell you that. Peace is when pain finally has somewhere honest to rest. "No," I said. "It brought both." He nodded like he understood. Across the table, Evan had barely spoken since Vanessa's apology. He looked older than he had when he boarded the yacht. Not physically. Something else. Ambition can make a man stand tall, but shame has a way of making him meet his true height. When the evening began to wind down, guests came to shake my hand. Not all of them knew what to say. One man thanked me for my service. A woman told me her brother had been rescued off Cape Lookout years earlier by volunteers. Mrs. Hargrove pressed my hand between both of hers and said, "Your wife was right. The work matters." I thanked each of them. Vanessa did not approach me in front of the crowd again. For that, I was grateful. Some apologies should not become performances. She stood near the railing, speaking softly with no one, her arms folded against the night breeze. For the first time since I had met her, she did not look like she was trying to be seen. Charles walked me toward the gangway when it was time to leave. Evan followed a few steps behind us. The deck was cool now. The salt air had sharpened. My leg ached from the long evening, but each step felt lighter than it had when I boarded. That is the strange thing about dignity. It does not heal bone, but it changes the weight a man carries. At the top of the gangway, Charles stopped. "I'll send a car," he said. "You've done enough." "I disagree," I smiled. "I know you do." He laughed softly, then placed a hand on my shoulder. "Come to the groundbreaking next spring," he said. "Not as a guest this time, as the name on the building." I looked out at the dark water. A rescue center carrying my name. Scholarships for children of men and women who ran toward storms. Equipment for small stations that knew what it meant to do too much with too little. Helen would have liked that. "I'll be there," I said. Charles's hand tightened once, then released. He stepped away, leaving me at the gangway with my son. For a moment, Evan said nothing. The boy who once reached for my hand in parking lots was gone, of course. Time takes children and returns adults. But standing there under the yacht lights, with the harbor wind moving through his hair, I could see something of that boy still trapped inside him, frightened and ashamed. "Dad," he said. One word, no excuse in it. That was a start. I waited. His eyes were wet, though he tried to hide it. I should have said something. "Yes," I said. He swallowed. "I heard her. I heard every word. I know." He looked down toward my cane. I told myself I was keeping the peace. I looked at him then. "No, son. You were keeping your place." The words hurt him, I saw that, but some truths are not cruel just because they sting. Evan nodded slowly. "You're right." That surprised me more than any apology would have. He took a breath. "I wanted them to see me as someone important. I thought if tonight went right, doors would open. I thought if Vanessa was happy, if Whitmore noticed me, if everything looked perfect," his voice broke. "I let you become the thing I was willing to hide." The harbor wind moved between us. For years after Helen died, I had wondered if I had failed Evan somehow. Maybe I had been too quiet, too proud, too tired. Maybe I had mistaken providing for teaching. Maybe I had shown him how to endure pain, but not how to honor the people who carried it. But a father cannot live his child's character for him. He can only stand there when the truth arrives and hope the man chooses better. I don't need you to be ashamed forever, I said. That won't help either of us. Evan wiped his face quickly with the heel of his hand. What do you need? I looked at my son for a long time. I need you to remember that silence is a decision, I said. And the next time someone makes another person feel small in front of you, I need you to decide faster. He closed his eyes. I will. I believed he meant it. I also knew meaning it tonight was easy. Living it tomorrow would be the test. He stepped forward, uncertain. Can I walk you down? This time he did not reach for my elbow like I was an inconvenience. He offered his arm the way Charles had, respectfully. I looked at that arm, then at his face. All right, I said. We went down the gangway slowly together. One step, pause. Another step, pause. Evan matched my pace without rushing me. At the bottom, I turned back once. The yacht Providence glowed against the dark water, bright and elegant and impossibly still. On board, people would talk about what happened that night for years, maybe in polished versions, maybe in honest ones. They would remember the billionaire host, the old captain, the daughter-in-law who learned too late, the son who stood silent until silence became shame. But I would remember something else. I would remember that my limp had not embarrassed me when I climbed aboard. It had embarrassed the wrong people. And when I left, the same sound that had once made Vanessa turn away, the steady tap of my cane against the dock, felt like music. So if this story reached something in you, remember this. Never measure a person's worth by the way they walk, the age in their face, or the quietness of their voice. Some people carry storms you know nothing about. Some scars are not signs of weakness. They are proof that someone once stood between danger and another human life. And if you believe respect still matters, share this story with someone who needs that reminder. Subscribe for more stories about family dignity and the quiet strength of people the world too often overlooks.